Hi, my name is Camryn Duncan. My informative speech is on women in the military. Here's my audience: Abigail and Aubrey. So, my way of starting off my speech is talking about the rate of women in the military. Since since it's become legal for women to be part of the military, the rate has completely skyrocketed. Like since the very first woman, her name is Deborah Sampson. We're going to talk about her later. But since she was around, like more and more women have become interested in the military and making it a career for themselves. So women began serving in the military during the Revolutionary War, and they did it out of like necessity because their husbands were fighting. So since their husbands were fighting and they didn't have any rights back in those days, they were left to try to provide for themselves, and the only way they could do that was by supporting their husbands who were in the war. So they would become nurses, like, and they were a very important part of the war because George Washington even asked Congress to pay women to care for their wounded because women were better caregivers. And even though men were originally in the nurses, they were needed for battle, so they decided to just enlist their wives into doing it. Luckily, Congress approved of what George Washington said, and so they got paid, but it was very, very little. They were also dishwashers, cooks. They did the laundry, but this all had to get approved by an officer. So instead of doing all of that basic housewife stuff, a lot of women just decided to become a soldier. So they would cross dress and become try to dress like men and try to disguise themselves as men in order to fight. Like if their husband got wounded, some women decided to become soldiers and would dress themselves in their husband's clothing. Or like some women were very patriotic and wanted to sacrifice themselves for the country. Like I said before, Deborah Sampson was one of the very first women to do this, and she cross dressed in order to fight against the British, but was caught after she got wounded. And they gave her a military pension and was given honorable discharge, which was really surprising because usually they would get in a lot of trouble for doing stuff like that. Okay, the fast forward a little bit, and Loretta Walsh was the very first woman to enlist in the military, and she enlisted on March 17th, 1970, and she was enlisted in the Navy. This is very hard to believe because back women didn't even get the right to vote until 1920. So this is very surprising, and it was very surprising back in those days too. Uh, she was the very first woman to reach chief petty officer, and during the World War II, but she was the very first woman to fill a non-nursing housekeeping position, and she served in Pennsylvania, actually Philadelphia. In 1948, Congress passed the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, and it just gives women a permanent status in the military. They get the same veterans benefits as a man does. They get the same military authority and regulations. They get the same boot camps, the same everything. They also get the same treatment, thankfully. Um, so as you can tell, women in the military are very important. They are very, very needed in nowadays. In fact, there's a lot of women who choose being in the military as a career, so they get the same benefit. Thankfully, women get a lot of the same benefits. But I'm thank you for watching my video, And I hope you have a good night.
Bye.